Holy cow. I mean, Mike shocked me awake. I was in my Friday doldrums. Mike and I were chatting about plans for next week. And all of a sudden, he put on the theme music, and I was about ready to start tap dancing in my chair. But I won't. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's Friday. We're back. That's right. You know, we just took a little break while Mike was cavorting with his wife in the South Seas, or at least the Caribbean, and I was lost at the cosmos, unable to figure out how to toggle all the on switches that go with this budding media empire of ours. Hey, here's a question for you this morning if you're tuning in. Are you a domestic terrorist? You might be, at least in the FBI's mind. Shocking story in Newsweek yesterday that's got me spitting angry. The FBI, the Newsweek sicked several reporters on the FBI and spent 2-3 months investigating what they're doing with respect to quote unquote domestic terrorism, and wrote a piece with a headline that should give you some concerns. Donald Trump followers targeted by FBI as 2024 election years. Now that's not the sort of headline that you would expect to see out of the quote unquote mainstream media. You know, you might expect to see that in Gateway Pundit. You might expect to see it, on a right-leaning broadcast. But this is the mainstream media reporting. And so, you know, when the captain of the Titanic tells you the ship is sinking, I think you got to listen. It's not some conspiracy theorist sitting at the cruise bar. Here's what they've learned. In the run-up to the 2024 election, the department, the FBI, is surveilling the American political landscape with growing misgivings about domestic violence and potential terrorist attacks. And they're focusing a good part of their program on anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremism, AGAVE. There's a new program. There's a new list of people, the AGAVE program. And I want you to remember that.
It's agave, right? It's I do have to give them some credit for a catchy acronym there, agave. I know there's an extra A, but it's just kind of funny that we're doing this immigration crisis thing. We're talking about the security or lack thereof at our southern border, and I'm just brought to the plant that gives us tequila, right? The agave plant.
Well, there you go. I mean, you're going to need it by the time you're going to need a shot of tequila by the time we're finished with this broadcast. Because my blood is boiling over this story. It's everything that I feared was going on and was going to happen based on what I saw in the Proud Boys story, or Proud Boys case rather, was as we litigated it, and the terrified look of senior Justice Department officials that we continue to ask too many questions in open court, and the Justice Department's insistence that every time we talked about confidential human sources buried within the Proud Boys or other domestic groups, that these things be under seal. The FBI is watching Americans. And if this reminds you of the COINTELPRO program in the 1970s, you've got good reason to believe that's the case. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI and other intelligence agencies infiltrated the left because they thought the left presented a threat to the stability of American institutions, and they wanted to destabilize these groups. Now, mind you, this was at a time when the Weather Underground was actually bombing multiple places, per week in the United States, sometimes multiple times per day. So now what we've got, according to the Newsweek story, and I'm not sure I read this correctly, but there seemed to be a sentence in it that suggested there were 4,500 FBI agents involved in surveilling, quote unquote, domestic extremism. So that means they're looking at your, and that's focused, of course, on MAGA.
So I think I'll read from that paragraph. It says, quote, the FBI, despite its rhetoric and numbers, seems to agree the Bureau applies only limited resources to deal specifically with domestic terrorism, and those resources haven't really increased. Now, recall, this is Newsweek, so I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with the slant that they're providing on this to say that, resources haven't really been increased for dealing with domestic terror threats, or, whatever they would classify those to be. It goes on. The FBI has only about 4,500 agents, intelligence analysts, attorneys, and other staff in its field offices focused on terrorism, according to the Bureau.
Okay, and that's the sentence I couldn't understand.
Only about 1/4 of these focus on domestic terrorism. The Bureau allocates about 1,100 personnel, or an increase of about 300 full-time people since January 6th. The total is only about 3% of the FBI's employees.
I still don't know what that sentence means. Can somebody give me an editor over there? Is that 1,100 people? Is that 4,500 people? What's the total number of FBI employees? I mean, again, it obscures more than it tells, but it tells plenty. And what it tells us is that if your views are if you're unhappy in the United States, if you have anger in your heart about the direction the country is moving and you express it, you might be targeted for an investigation. And that to me is amazing and intolerable. Dawn McNeil, was recently swatted not long ago. And she wondered, I wasn't crazy to think for a moment the SWAT team was actually after me. Who knows what doors are being banged on? Who knows what mail is being read? Who knows in the Agave era whether we're entering a new COINTELPRO era? And so I can tell you on my to-do list has been filing an FOI request for more information on confidential human sources in the Proud Boys. That just got knocked up a few pegs, and we'll probably be looking for Agave information as well. The article goes on to cite a number of internal FBI agents, and even some of the internal agents are upset or concerned. One of them says we've definitely crossed a Rubicon. They've crossed a divide from investigating crimes to investigating those who might commit crimes based on their political views. And if your view of the United States is it's on the wrong track and you want to make America great again, you want to restore it to values from which it has departed, you might be regarded as an extremist. Now, you think I'm making this up? Mike sent me a text this morning with a link. Or maybe it was last night. I can't even remember at this point. It's early yet in the day. To Hillary Clinton, who made a throwaway comment in an interview on CNN that maybe it's time to send MAGA supporters to some sort of formal deprogramming program. And it starts as a.
Let's listen to this. I'm going to pull it up. This comes from The Blaze. So I'll share this tab, and I'll do my best to make sure that the volume goes clear to our viewers. So
sitting on an avocado.
Here we go.
Oh, I'm a terrorist.
Citizens in both parties in the past, and we had very bitter battles over all kinds of things: gun control and climate change and the economy and taxes. But there wasn't this little tail of extremism wagging the dog of the Republican Party as it is today. And sadly, so many of those extremists, those MAGA extremists, take their marching orders from Donald Trump, who has no credibility left by any measure. He's only in it for himself. He's now defending himself in civil actions and criminal actions. And when do they break with him? Because at some point, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members, but something needs to happen. And how do you?
Okay, so let Mark
directly from Wine Mom's Story Hour. You know what I mean?
It starts as a throwaway line, evolves into a chuckle, becomes a proposal, and ultimately becomes a program. These ideas that get floated out there, I'm not going to take the conspirator's view and say this is market testing. She threw it out there for reaction. It sounded contemporaneous, but it sounded truly believed. But here's a memo to Hillary. Hillary, you're blaming the canary for the conditions in the coal mine. People aren't going to Donald Trump because they think he's a wonderful human being. People are going to Donald Trump because he's expressing their disaffection with the status quo. And, you want to talk about deprogramming, Hillary? Maybe the country is deprogramming mainstream media. Maybe you've been deprogrammed. Hillary, you lost my vote in 2015 when I watched you say in a southern state, it's time for white Americans to recognize what they owe people of color. You swallowed the identitarian pill. And at that moment, Hillary, I didn't want to be re-educated by you the New York Times 1619 project that's going to try to recast our nation's history as systemic racism from the top down that we need to pay for now with reparations. No, I'm not going there, Hillary. I'm not going to be reprogrammed. I'm going to deprogram mainstream media by creating an alternative source of information and viewpoints. And Hillary Dillery Doc, that's what's going on in this country, babe. And the notion that I want to play around with the idea that people ought to be grabbed from the coal mine and reprogrammed to become more supine versions of what you want to sell, but what ordinary Americans are rejecting is chilling to me. Hillary Dillery Dear, here's what you need to be asking yourself when you have the courage to look in the mirror. I realize the view has become less flattering over time, but we're looking at you, babe. Look at yourself and ask yourself the following question. Why do 30% of Americans passionately support for President of the United States, a man who is under indictment in 4 separate jurisdictions and is facing civil trials for fraud? It's unheard of in the United States to have a candidate of that sort be appealing to people. But he's appealing for a reason, Hillary, and you need to be asking yourself what that reason is. The reason is ordinary people, ordinary Americans feel disaffected and disconnected from a system that they believe is selling them a bill of goods they don't want to buy. MAGA is not the outlier, Hillary. You are the outlier. And the reaction to you is expressed in people from the coal mines saying to the canary, I may not like you, but I hear the tweets and I get it because you're talking about the America I live in. Hillary, we don't need a re-education camp, babe. You do.
So the chat's really going with this. So I do want to recognize a few comments here. It's me again, Cy. I love this. Says 80 million equals little tail, which is a reference to what she's saying. You know, she was saying the tail wagging the dog with respect to right-wing extremism, or however she phrased that. But that's a great counterpunch to that line. The fact that the incumbent president, candidate for president in 2020, received in excess of 74 million votes in this country, right? It was, I think for modern history, record turnout for a presidential election. I still joke, and I don't know that the joke is really funny anymore, but I've been quoted as saying, 80 million of us voted for Joe Biden, right? 80 million of us voted for what we are looking at on the TV, right? Falling asleep at the podium, gaffe after gaffe after gaffe, visibly deteriorating. 80 million of us voted for that. However, 74 million at least voted for Donald Trump. That is not the tail wagging the dog in any respect.
No,
right?
That's a divided country, Hillary and FBI. And you can't just pick sides, or you can actually, and Merrick Garland has, and decide to investigate one half as being somehow radical. Where's the investigation of BLM? Where's the investigation of the mostly peaceful arsons in the summer of 2020? I tell you, in my work with the groups that I've represented in the J6 cases, this is the narrative that drives so much of their support. People were told to stay home in 2020. They did. But then they turned on their televisions and saw it was okay to riot. It was okay to loot. It was okay to tear down statues of revered figures in American political life. It was okay to attack American norms and institutions. It was okay to attack the values of those who stayed home. You got a pass to do that. And then when people reacted in anger in 2020 and went to the Capitol and things got out of hand and there was a riot, they've been treated as political criminals in a years-long jihad that is filling the federal prisoners with people who were patriots that day, some of whom committed crimes. And so the disparate, and I get the difference. I used to talk to prosecutors about this in breaks in the J6 trial I did for the Proud Boys. I get it. It's different to burn down a piece of private property than it is to disturb a public proceeding, to interfere with the count of the electoral votes. I get that politically, one is more valuable than the other, but I would venture to guess that for the overwhelming majority of Americans, they felt far more threatened, intimidated, and unnerved by events that took place across the country in 2020 than they did by what took place in Washington, D.C. for several hours on January 6, 2021. Never forget for a moment that the institutions held. Never forget for a moment that the votes got counted. They got counted on schedule, and the power was peacefully transferred. But how many people were afraid to go downtown? How many people in the summer of 2020? How many people lost their businesses? How many people sat back once the decision was made to try to defund the police and lost confidence in their own community and their safety within their community? These are people who are talking. These are people who are supporting Trump. These are people who are saying, let's make America great again and forget a narrative that's making this country into an existential shithole. And, you know, I mean, you want to talk about deprogramming, Hillary? I'm not the one who woke up one day and decided I couldn't decide what a woman was. I'm not the guy who woke up one day and decided we need to rework the English language so that we now use the plural pronoun they to refer to people who can't decide whether they're a he or a she. I'm not the person who's added the alphabet soup to the LGBTQ plus whatever and has now announced there are more genders than we can count. I'm not the person who sent transgender dancers into primary schools for transgender story hour. You want to talk about reprogramming, Hillary? There's been an enormous reprogramming of American values in the last 10 to 15 years, and a lot of ordinary Americans are pissed off, fed up, and they don't want to take it. And so you're going to weaponize the Justice Department to declare them to be violent extremists because they're angry and they're prepared to react to the direction the country is moving in. Do that, Merrick Garland, and you will drive a stake into the heart of America and make this situation so much worse. There is still time to make peace. There is still time to debate values. But if you're going to weaponize the federal government, forget about it, because people are going to react, and they're going to react violently, and they're going to react violently because the fact of the matter is it's our government. And if our government turns on us, we will, and we have every right to turn on it. And, you know,
yeah, we've talked before about, you know, the precursors for the big R revolution, right? Historically, and what our founding fathers believed to be the set of facts and circumstances that would together represent that inflection point. You have on this stream before opined, Norm, which I'm very much in agreement at this point, that the precursors that exist today far exceed those which existed historically for 1776, right? And so just to connect that to this story, the Blaze ran a companion piece on the Newsweek reporting of the FBI targeting MAGA or Trump supporters for domestic terrorism, and in that piece, they reference that President Joe Biden has also repeatedly claimed that the MAGA movement is a threat to the country. So I'm going to quote a few things just from a historical timeline perspective that would have laid the groundwork, which we all know, but our memory is so short in these very dense and volatile and frenetic news cycles that we often forget the mental image of Joe Biden standing in front of a backlit White House that was blood red, you know, with a very, very authoritarian and angry demeanor towards a certain demographic of our country to which we make reference on this stream. But to go back to the Blaze article here, says, quote, in May 2022, Biden said of Trump supporters, quote, because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history. In August 22, Biden said the MAGA philosophy is, quote, like semi-fascism. In September 2022, Biden said, quote, Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
You know, if you look back at the history. Yeah, go ahead. I cut you off, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, it's amazing that these things happen in such quick succession from the federal executive, from what we used to refer to as the leader of the free world. Now that seems like sort of a chide dig, right, at what that office has become under this administration. But it's amazing to me that we have a personality in Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, who and lest we forget, was known to have destroyed and acid washed personal servers, where she was using private servers and infrastructure to conduct formal U.S. state business in her capacity as Secretary of State. We're talking about someone who quite literally regarded destruction of all of that evidence as a lesser risk than it falling into the hands of some investigator that would look at it honestly and understand what this truly meant for what had become of the elected regime, with an appointed regime within our country at that point. She went on to lose the presidential election. So I'm struggling in view of those two things to understand why CNN is taking the time to sit down and discuss with Hillary Clinton culturally anything relevant to this modern moment. She's responsible in large part for ushering it in.
Well, she is. And so, I think that Hillary has never really interested me other than as a species of political, political pathology. And there she is this morning, but she speaks and she has followers, and her followers are largely the mainstream media groupies and those who are pressing a vision of America that many Americans don't accept. And the refusal to accept them has provoked a playful response that we need to be reprogrammed. We need formal deprogramming. We need education camps. We need to be protected from misinformation. We need to be protected from ourselves. This is the face of the new authoritarianism. All the chatter that Joe Biden can mumble about fascism and MAGA and so forth is simply wrong. If you look back at the broader sweep of American history, I don't think the MAGA people represent anything new in the United States. I think the 1619 crowd and the LGBTQ ABCDEFG groupies and the pronoun police are what what folks are reacting to. And this crowd isn't going to give up its quest for power easily, and there will be a struggle. And from time to time, it will be violent. And in 2024, that struggle will take place in the polling place. And passions being what they are, a violent country will have violent incidents. But for the FBI to look at these discrete acts and to take them out of historical context and to suggest that they reflect a movement that needs cracking down on, in other words, to pick political sides, will delegitimize the FBI. Let's pivot to the immigration piece you spotted in the Hill. This
is in the American mind.
Sorry about that, the American mind. So Mike and I, I am struggling with what to make of immigration because I think if ever there were a case where reality conflicts with our ideals and creates something like cognitive dissonance, that is the inability to see things as they are and to express them for what they really are, it's immigration right now. We have folks flowing into the country at a record rate, and we're all we're frozen. We have an inability to act because at some level we're all living in the shadow of the Statute of Liberty. The gift from France: give us your poor, you're tired, you're desperate, seeking to be free. Your huddled mass is seeking to be free, and we'll provide them with an opportunity. And now, on the southern border, so the world is calling our bluff, and it's landing in Texas. And the result is that many people, and these folks are being shipped out elsewhere in the United States, and many communities are feeling the strain of having to respond to new strangers within their mix. And this is something fundamentally different than other waves of immigration. Andrea Ocasio-Cortez's complaint to the contrary. Look at what's going on in New York City. Tens of thousands of people are arriving, and the mayor is saying, we just can't afford this. We're not going to have a New York any longer. And now, the mayor is going to be traveling down to South America, trying to figure out why people are flocking to this country. And then, you read the headlines these days. I honestly can't tell what's satire and what's real anymore. Joe Biden, Mr. There shall be no wall, everybody's welcome, selling pieces of the wall at a discount, is now deciding to rebuild the wall on the southern border because he woke up and realized we can't tolerate this. And so he'll break with the left, who views of his party and his end of the spectrum, who believes that we should have open borders. But is there an ordinary American who really believes that we should have open borders? Is there an ordinary American that's prepared to give their spare room to a family, their summer home to a family, that's prepared to house an immigrant on a couch because winter is coming and there are more people flocking into the country that we can accommodate? Look at New York City. They've cut municipal spending across the board by 5% across departments, while to make funds available for the $1 billion bill they're facing to place immigrants in hotels. These are folks who are coming into the country illegally, while ordinary Americans are either on the street or in homeless shelters. People have a right to be angry, to be confused, and to be upset about this. And I think to suggest otherwise is to live in a parallel universe that is disconnected from reality. So at some level, our ideas about ourselves are going to have to respond to the reality in which we live. We're all pragmatists at heart. Everybody's got to get up. Everybody's got to eat. Everybody's got to take care of their family and themselves. We have ideals. Sometimes our ideals have to bend to the pragmatic reality around us. The country is being, I don't want to say overrun, but its resources are being taxed in major metropolitan areas and in the state of Texas. And we need
I love that word tax. You know, I love that word tax because it implies an intent, some sort of application of force, right? That our infrastructure, that our citizenry, that our ideals are being taxed. We've talked about that concept before within the parameters of ESG and DEI. And I also, I'm coming around to the notion, Norm, I'm glad that you used that word, that this too is a form of that tax.
You know, I can't, I'm looking at T.C. Mayhew's remark, all single men. And, I hear chatter online and, this isn't immigration, this isn't a migration, it's an invasion and who's behind it. And then you see all these single men and you hear reports that people are given vouchers for travel expenses around the country to be distributed. I don't know. I mean, I represent conspiracy theorists. I try not to become one. But I am becoming convinced that the growing migration crisis is part of something condoned by the global community. And I'll call it the Great Delusion. I think that in the name of global equity, the United States is regarded as an outlier, that we need to pay our fair share of caring for the world's problems. This is common chatter in the UN and international NGOs, non-governmental organizations. The only way to catch our attention is to make us part of the third world. So overrun the country with people we can't care for, and suddenly we'll realize there are many people not just within our borders, but outside them who need care, and maybe we'll be a better global partner. I don't know that ordinary Americans are going to stand for the quality of life in their communities being dissolved, being undermined as a result of some global political effort. And I think New York City is the acid test there.
I love the article from the American Mind, and I don't want us to overlook that. I do highly recommend that to all of you. Mr. Adam Ellwanger, I've put his tweet about the article, as well as over there on the side, you can see his profile. I think he is affiliated with the Claremont Institute, as well as the American Mind. But I'll quote just I guess some of the opening. I don't want to spoil this, but just to give everybody an overview of what he's tussling with in this article. It is a historical look back at the conditions that made civil war ripe in America around 1860. He quotes the president then, and it's funny because he also talks about how the conditions for then really necessitated a more collectivized, forceful federal response. So I do want to acknowledge at the beginning here that in terms of foundations for the article itself, How to Turn a Cold War Hot, that we are not in a situation that is akin to 1860 or 1861 with respect to our federal government. In 1860, 1861, federalism, that is the 10th Amendment, that is states' rights, were much more powerful than a collectivized federal response. One might argue that it was the Civil War that actually begun the slow march toward what we recognize as a bloated federal government today. And I don't want to get distracted with that, but I will read just a couple of lines from this, Norm, for our audience. Quote, over 1 million people from all over the world will cross our border this year, the same as every other year since Biden came into office. Think about that opening sentence. Since then, the number of new illegal immigrants would amount to a city roughly the size of Houston, Texas, the 4th biggest city in America, where I happen to live. In the last month alone, the tally of immigrants who entered the nation illegally, the ones that we are aware of anyway, was equivalent to the population of Charleston, South Carolina. So in the last month, Norm, we have had an influx of illegal immigrants we are aware of that is equivalent to the population of Charleston, South Carolina. To say that this problem compounds over time is an understatement. Many Americans feel as though they are losing their country, but even that's inaccurate. It's being given away by the people elected to run the nation. Citizens have tried to register these frustrations at the ballot box, but in the face of this disapproval, the federal government hasn't simply allowed the influx to continue. They have actively worked to hamstring any effort by border states to stop the invasion. In late September, Texas Governor Greg Abbott took to social media to post footage of federal agents cutting and removing razor wire that state officials had placed at the Rio Grande to deter illegal crossings. I'll stop there because the point of this article is to give a glimpse to the rest of America that Texas is indeed the battleground. That is the fertile soil upon which this Cold War is now being fought. In other words, Ellwanger talks about the federal government hamstringing Texas and requiring that Texas keep illegal immigrants there in their state, but also to not allow them to keep them from coming in altogether.
That's really the point. And I'm glad you paraphrased this by the relationship of states and federal government prior to the Civil War and things now. Prior to the Civil War is regarded as the prelude to the second founding, the adoption of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which transferred an enormous amount of power to the federal government and made, in the eyes of many scholars, nation building possible. It did so at the expense of states' rights, and there has been a running debate within constitutional law and within the courts over time about the role of state and federal government. That's federalism. It's an ungainly balance. It's there by design. We're not supposed to have an efficient government. But if you're a Texan right now and you're watching hundreds of thousands of people pour across your border and you're told you can't stop them from coming in and you can't move them elsewhere because Uncle Sam says so, therefore you have to welcome them and find a way to deal with them, who in Washington has the right to tell you how in Texas to live? And how long, if you're a Texan, will you let Uncle Sam dictate the terms and conditions of your ordinary life? And so I think where Ellwanger is persuasive to me is he places this ongoing problem in the context of this relationship between state and federal government. And what he says is basically Texas has become a pressure cooker. The federal government has placed Texans in a no-win position. And how long do we expect them to simply tolerate it? And so the title of the essay is How to Turn a Cold War Hot. Make a people feel desperate. Make them feel like they've lost control of their own lives. Make them suspicious of their government's ability to help them flourish, and you'll have a people who becomes angry at government. Now, the federal government's response is going to say, these are mega domestic terrorists, and we're going to need to investigate them. That's just going to make the problem worse. I'm not a domestic terrorist if I want to keep my community safe.
So I'm glad that you brought this up, Norm. If I may lob my conspiracy theory now, since you've lobbed one earlier, my conspiracy theory is that everything that we've covered today has coalesced. That these are one and the same in terms of issues or problems that we should be dealing with. And I say that because of this. While Texas politically might be more purple now than it's ever been, right, or at least in recent memory, Texas is widely regarded sort of within the collective consciousness of the United States as what in terms of values, Norm, right? You've got sort of the history of sort of a manifest destiny meets a true grit. It's big, wide open spaces in agriculture, dusty, masculine, Second Amendment, free speech, self-reliance, cultivation.
Bunch of MAGA terrorists to me. Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying now is that what I've put on the screen, it comes directly from the American Mind article. And if it is such that this administration has organized and conducted itself in a manner to apply disproportionate pressure on the one state in the union that we know that has an economy of its own, the size of some major countries in Western Europe, and should it secede, would be able to function on its own quite well and without necessarily the help economically from the United States. Think about energy and oil, all of these mental images and associations one can make in terms of the individual as sovereign. That resides in the state of Texas. To me, the federal government's efforts as applied to the state of Texas is provocation in a naked form. The news now that the FBI is monitoring Trump supporters, right, in conjunction with what I would consider to be provocation, is an invitation from the federal government at a scale quite like maybe an order of magnitude larger than January 6th, right? It is, can we provoke those people who we have been saying are extreme, saying are voting for these things as semi-fascism, etc., right? Who are predominantly white. Can we provoke them to spark, to catalyze hot conflict, and then use our mandate as the federal police force to go in and eradicate that problem?
I don't like the way that sounds, but I can't deny the force of the analysis. And I think we'll be monitoring this as it unfolds, because 2024 is going to be a year filled with surprises. You heard it here first. You know, I think the Democrats may well not have Joe Biden as their candidate. There may be a reaction to his sort of geriatric mushmouth tendencies, and there may be another candidate to come in from the wings. You know, it may be somebody against Trump. It may be that Trump isn't the Republican candidate. Events are going to unfold in perhaps unprecedented ways. It's going to be a wild ride. And so the FBI is ripe to have concerns about where the bumps go. But I do think that as ordinary Americans, we need to fight back. And I'm not calling for arms. At this point, I'm calling for a war of words. At this point, I'm calling for public criticism of the FBI. I'm calling for people to call out Merrick Garland and say, hey, ho, ho, Merrick Garland's got to go. He's weaponizing the Justice Department against Americans who are guilty of radicalism, in his view, because they want to defend their way of life against changes being imposed upon them from the top down. And maybe the emergence of populism in the United States is an historic force that is as fundamental and as significant as the emergence of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments after the Civil War. We live in a global economy, but we don't want to become a globalist puppet. We don't want to become a state of global efforts. We want significance in our own homes and in our own communities. So stay tuned, folks. We're going to be on this like white on rice. Not that we, not that we.
I love Jeff's comment here. Norm's teleprompter is on fire today. We only wish that Norm was reading off a teleprompter. It would make us feel better about our own inadequacies, if I can even get that out. One comment I don't want to let go. Pete Atkinson is in the chat today, and I always feel obligated to get my points and dunk on Norm like he got dunked on last night by DJ Moore. Anyway, let's see. Where was this? It was regarding immigration.
Oh, but hey, listen, Pete Atkinson. Folks, you've got to look at the Merry Beggars and his series on the Saints. I've fallen behind. They're coming out so quickly, but I think they're already on their 5th episode on St. Francis. And you'd be saying, what's the matter with you? Why are you talking about saints? I'm talking about saints because in the confusion of our daily lives, we all want the same thing. We want mercy, we want grace, we want justice. We want a sense of proportion in our lives. And what the saints tell us is that in their reaction to the extremes of their time, they are calls to righteousness. They're each different. Their spiritual struggles are different from one another because the context in which they struggle is different. But the quest for a glimpse of eternity, the quest for a taste of the divine, the need for grace and an acknowledgement of our shortcomings and dependence on the God who gave us life. That's the story of each saint. And Mary Beggars in Atkinson's series are a breath of fresh air. Please take a look at them.
I won't even try to follow that. Beautifully said, Norm, but you're absolutely correct. With respect to immigration, a couple of comments there just to put an end cap on this. Pete says, people have been selling our country out to undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants for 40 to 50 years. All the solutions are simple and obvious. Put up a wall, deport illegal immigrants, be humane towards asylum seekers, get rid of a multicultural ideal, and understand that people need to be assimilated.
I think that's right. And Dawn, I think you're right. People need to be fired up about this in daily life, not just on social media. I agree. I mean, I adopt the mantra, if you see something, say something. And it can be in a small way. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day and they referred to themselves as they. And I said, how many of you are there? And the guy looked at me like, what are you talking about? You're not a they. I mean, language matters. The fight for reality matters. Engages it as a bold warrior, one handshake at a time, and from the bottom up, you'll change the world.
Norm, I love doing this. I'm glad we're here talking about this stuff. It's unfortunate that this is what leads us, but I also am not. I'm not worried about that part. I'm not stressed that, you know, these are the times that require people of character, people of backbone and substance to discuss and to shine a light for those who may be inclined to hide or inclined to shy away from what they believe is an insurmountable force on the other side. Anyway, we are here every weekday, Monday through Friday. Norm, you and I will discuss some plans for next week because it is your turn to travel a little bit. So I think we've got a nice idea rolling here. You'll be on the West Coast for all of next week for the most part. And so the difficulty for us now is I don't want you to have to be up at 5 a.m. every day.
Well, good. I have to, but if we, you know, but we'll be, look, I leave for the West Coast on Wednesday and then then I'm bopping around the country until the end of October for one thing or another. So we'll be here, you know, and if I need, one way or the other. So come back, follow us here, follow us on social medias. Give us a 5-star rating or
just leave us alone. You know, leave a nice comment or leave us alone. Yeah. Anyway, we'll be back on Monday, 8 a.m. Eastern. You know where to find us at LawPod Daily on X. Please follow us, hit the notification bell so you know when we go live. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Rumble. Why limit yourself? Don't be limited. Do all of them. And then also, like Norm said, if you find us on our podcast platforms, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, Audible, Overcast, etc., leave us 5 stars or leave us alone.
And if you're out and about today, Dawn, at your local coffee shop, or knowing you at your pickleball shop, or knowing you when you're in the public library reading up on how to bolster your fantasy football team's preparation for its epic confrontation with the only undefeated team in the league, the Pattis Objectors, this weekend. Say to people, hey, hey, ho, ho, Merrick Garland's got to go. And when they say, what are you talking about? Tell them why. Tell them why.
I love Angry Dog's comment here. 5 a.m. for Norm works for me.
It probably works for me too. I'm up early.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Norm, I will talk to you in a little bit. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.